The discipline of psychology is broad and captivating, constantly innovating in its exploration of the countless factors that influence a human psyche. However, it hasn't been without its darker chapters. Early studies, unchecked by modern ethical practice, push the boundaries of cruelty and barbarism in ways previously unimaginable. Nowhere is this more evident than in the case of Harlow's monkeys. Before we jump in, this video will be containing potentially distressing themes such as animal abuse and themes of depression, so if that's something that triggers or upsets you, viewer discretion is advised. Thank you so much for watching the video, and let's get into it. Harry Harlow was born Harry Frederick Israel on October 31st, 1905 in Fairfield, Iowa, USA. He was born the third of 4 children. Little is known about his early life, but he recalls that his mother was cold to him and he experienced bouts of depression throughout his life. He attended Reed College in Oregon, in which he was able to pass an aptitude test to be able to enroll into Stanford University in 1924. Notably, he actually started as an English major, but due to poor grades, opted for psychology instead. Israel graduated with a major in psychology, supervised by vision expert Walter Miles and animal behaviourist Calvin Stone, both of which had served as president of the American Psychological Association, and were supervised by psychologist Lewis Terman, who developed the Stanford-Binet IQ test. Israel conducted his research under Terman and received a PhD in 1930. It was at this point when Terman convinced Israel to change his last name on account of it sounding Jewish, which was interesting considering Israel wasn't Jewish, to which he did and changed his name to Harry Harlow. Harlow was appointed professor of psychology at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where he allegedly complained that the Department of Psychology didn't give him enough laboratory space, to which in order to rectify this, Harlow bought and renovated an old building outside of the university, which came to be known as the Psychology Primate Laboratory, which was one of the first psychology labs of its time to specifically test animal behaviour. Should be noted here that when I say the first psychology lab, I mean that in an official context. And so, if you look at Pavlov's dogs, that could technically be considered a animal psychology lab, but they kind of just had a dog in a room and hooked its spit glands up to a pipe. I mean, in an official context. I probably should do a video on that, actually. It's kind of fucked up. Anyway, the lab later relocated to its current position in Wisconsin-Madison in 1950. Harlow served as lab director from 1956 to 1974. Harlow first began his research at the university working with primates at Henry Wheeler Zoo, where he developed the Wisconsin General Testing Apparatus, which studied learning, cognition, and memory. By using this apparatus, he found that as the monkeys grew up, they began to use certain learning strategies in order to complete his task, which he referred to as learning sets. And this marked the series of experiments so commonly infamous with Harlow's legacy. It should be noted that at the time, a subdiscipline of psychology known as behaviourism was quite popular, so that's essentially the idea that psychology could be observed by observing actual behaviour. So an example would be like Pavlov's dogs, where they observed that a dog would associate a bell with food. It's important to bring that up because a lot of behaviourists believe that kind of observing animals kind of more or less translated to human psychology, and that they could observe the behaviours of animals and it would translate to our psychology. And pretty much they could do things to animals that they couldn't do with humans. So that's why they loved to use animals in their studies. So Harlow probably, more than likely, used primates in the studies because they are the closest things to humans that he could find. And of course, he can do things to them that he can't do to humans. In 1932, Harlow established a breeding colony for rhesus macaque monkeys in order to provide some for his research. Harlow in particular was interested in the effects of stress, abandonment and isolation, and based on his previous research with the primates, he wanted to see if those different factors had any influence on the learning strategies that he'd established. In 1958, Harlow conducted a study which will come to be both his most influential and controversial. Harlow took 16 infant rhesus monkeys from their mothers and replaced them with what he called surrogate mothers. These were small mannequins made of wood and wire that would be placed in the cage with the infant monkey. The infant monkeys learned to recognise the mother by their unique face and preferred one above all others. Harlow's experiment attempted to investigate whether infants preferred bare wire mothers or cloth-covered mothers. So, for context, the consensus within psychology at the time was that mother-child attachment was primarily because of the mother providing the child with food. So it meant that in theory, an infant would become attached to anyone or anything that provided it milk. So in order to investigate this consensus, Harlow devised this experiment. He presented the infants with a wire mother and a cloth mother under two conditions. One where the wire mother held the food bottle and the cloth mother did not, and vice versa. If the theory is correct, the monkeys would form a stronger bond with whatever surrogate provided them with food. However, the study's results suggested otherwise. Overwhelmingly, the monkeys clung to the cloth mother. Even in the conditions where the wire mother had the milk bottle, the infants still clung to the cloth mother, only briefly leaving to feed. Harlow concluded that this contact comfort was essential to healthy psychological development. Obviously, the ethical issues are already starting to kind of pop up around here. Obviously forcibly taking away infants from their mothers. But ain't seen nothing yet. Subsequent studies on infant rhesus monkeys continued to utilise the surrogate mothers throughout the experiments. Harlow conducted an open field test, one using the surrogate mother and one without, and found that the infants used the mother as a base for exploration. Effectively, the infant would wander off, but come back, and if it was frightened, it would come back to its mother. Without the surrogate mother, the infant would be paralysed in fear, curling up into a ball and sucking its thumb. Harlow also conducted a fear test in which the same conditions were present. Infants were with or without a mother and were exposed to a fear stimulus, normally in the form of a noise-making machine or a teddy bear. I have to say, I fucking hate this thing. In which the infants were terrified without the security of the surrogate, but when they were in the presence of the surrogate, they would even make contact with the device and even attempt to attack it. Harlow's studies contradicted the status quo of how children should be treated at the time. So at this time, contact with children was seen as harmful to their development for some reason. And effectively what Harlow's results said was that they needed discomfort. It was essential to their healthy psychological development that they ended up with discomfort, and that the mother provides much more than food to the infant. Harlow received critical acclaims for his works, being rewarded with the National Medal for Science in 1967 and also becoming the president of the American Psychological Association from 1958 to 1959. After this, he continued to work at Wisconsin-Madison University. However, in 1971, Harlow's wife died of cancer and he reportedly began to suffer from depression. Might add, that was treated with electroconvulsive therapy, because good idea. Harlow returned to work, but as Lauren Stater described, his colleagues noticed a difference in his demeanour. After this, he subsequently abandoned his research into attachment and began to look into social isolation and depression. Harlow would begin to experiment with varying levels of, quote, partial and total social isolation on infant monkeys. Partial social isolation involved the monkeys being put in a cage where they could hear, see and smell other monkeys, but would have no opportunity for social contact. Total isolation would see the monkeys grow up in isolation chambers, preventing any and all contact with other monkeys. In total isolation, these periods will go up from 3 months up to 2 years. Either Harlow and his colleagues or the chambers themselves will provide basic needs such as food, water and hygiene, but no physical or social contact. The results would be catastrophic to the monkey's psyche. Blank staring, repetitive pacing of the cage, and even self-mutilation were reported in the monkeys under the partial social isolation. Total isolation had even worse effects. Harlow himself wrote, "No monkey has died during isolation. When initially removed from total social isolation, however, they usually go into a state of emotional shock characterized by autistic self-clutching and rocking. 1 of 6 monkeys isolated for 3 months refused to eat after release and died 5 days later. The autopsy report attributed the death to emotional anorexia. Those who had been isolated for a year barely moved, explored, played, and were unable to mate. Again, tragically, 2 of the year-long isolates refused to eat and literally starved themselves to death." Harlow also noted that when he tried to reintegrate these isolates back into a normal environment, the other monkeys bullied them relentlessly, to the point where they feared that the other monkeys would kill them if the researchers didn't intervene. Harlow also wanted to investigate the effects of isolation on parenting, but there was one issue. As previously mentioned, the isolates were unable to mate. His solution to this was devising something he referred to as a, I'm going to say, R-word rack, in which monkeys were tied up in their mating position, and mating happened, so they would have offspring, and Harlow could study the effects of isolation on parenting. He found that, indeed, the isolate parents could not look after their own children. They would often neglect, abuse, and even, in some cases, kill their own children. This study demonstrated the knock-on effects of childhood neglect in both adulthood and parenthood. Perhaps the worst experiment of all was what Harlow referred to as the pit of despair. It's worth noting that Harlow pretty much refused to use scientific terminology, and he was well known for doing this as well. So scientifically, the thing that they put the monkeys in was called a vertical chamber apparatus, but he just kept wanting to change the name of it. First it was the Dungeon of Despair, the Well of Despair, and all of his researchers around him were like, you can't do that. And they basically told him, I think what they said it directly was, politically speaking, it is easier to call it a vertical chamber apparatus. But he didn't do that. Researcher Stephen Sumi described the device as little more than a stainless steel trough with sides that sloped to a rounded bottom. The infant was placed inside and the top covered by mesh. The experiment involved leaving socially developed infants, so effectively ones that had had social or maternal bonds, like proper ones that were healthy, and leaving them in this pit of despair in order to try and manifest the symptoms of depression. The monkeys would spend the first couple of days trying to clamber up the sloped sides before immediately giving up and ceasing any activity at all. The results saw subjective monkeys, quote, enormously disturbed. Sumi wrote that he could find no monkey who could fight against it, and any monkey that went in came out emotionally damaged. Charles Snowden, the head of psychology at Wisconsin-Madison at the time, was apparently appalled when he saw the sight of the vertical chambers they were using within the experiments. When asking Sumi why they were using them, Harlow allegedly replied, because that's how it feels when you're depressed. It could be argued from a scientific perspective now that Harlow was kind of using his own experiences of depression to kind of shape his own studies, which obviously could be considered unscientific. From a moral perspective, it seemed that his depression had exacerbated the cruelty within his experiments. Despite all of this, Harlow felt that he had not captured the true essence of depression, which he described being characterized by feelings of loneliness, helplessness, and a feeling of being trapped. Or to quote him directly, feeling sunk in a well of despair. Harlow's experiments, both then and now, are treated with both acclaim and criticism. Despite the unethical nature of his works, his findings contributed massively to the understanding of the development of infant attachment. His works highlighted the crucial element of contact comfort in the healthy psychological development of human children, which led to policy changes within institutions such as orphanages who had these ideas of no-touch policies and that it was bad to touch a child. And Harlow's works provided evidence that these were incredibly harmful and they needed to be changed. As well as this, his studies acted as a catalyst for the consideration of the ethics of animal testing and the ethics of proper modern psychology. Studies like Harlow's ultimately begged the question that has puzzled researchers for decades. When does the benefit of a study outweigh the cruelty? Harlow died from Parkinson's disease on December 6, 1981. Leaving, for better or for worse, an unforgettable legacy. I would like to say, as we conclude for this video, that the world is not all doom and gloom. I know that morbid curiosity probably brought you to this video, and I know how fun it is to go down the rabbit hole. I mean, I probably made a half-an-hour video on it, but it's important to not get your head stuck down there. Look after yourself, and make sure to see the world for its beauty rather than its flaws. And go look at some videos of puppies or something. Definitely not monkeys. Definitely not monkeys. If you or someone you know are struggling with mental health, I will put support services in the description below, so hit them up if you feel like you need to. If you've made it this far, thank you so much. It really does mean the world to me that people take their time out of their day to listen to me yap about shit. So it is genuinely massively appreciated. Thank you so much. This will be the first of a series on my channel known as the Cruelty of Early Psychology, where I kind of do a deep dive into these experiments that push the boundaries of kind of modern ethical practice back when psychology was still developing as a discipline. So look out my channel for that in the near future. Stay safe, knowledge is power, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers!